I am so delighted that you have joined us today for Into the Absurd, a virtually existential dinner conversation where every Saturday at 5 p.m. we are going to come up to the table with some of our favorite artists, producers, directors, friends, people in the community who are doing exciting and wonderful things during this time of extraordinary existential crisis. So one thing, I'm going to do some housekeeping here right now. If you are on with us, just mute your audio and mute your video. And you may want to go into your stop down at the bar on the bottom where it says stop video and hide all video participants. And that way you'll have the best view of the show. Saturdays at 5, we are going to be here for the foreseeable future. We will not be here next Saturday, which is July 4th, but we'll be back on the 11th, and we will be having the existential conversations that we would normally be having on the stage with the authors from the theater of the absurd that tell such wonderful stories in a very different time and place. We thought that the existential crises that we are facing here today, right now, are worth having here and having with folks in the community. So we want you to join in the conversation. And to do that, you will put your questions in the chat box there if you are on Zoom, or if you are joining us on Facebook Live, join in the conversation and we will definitely get you in the conversation. On today's show, I am so very delighted to be joined by Liz Goldberg. Liz is a friend, an artist. I met her at the Bethany Mission Gallery about, I don't know, a couple of years ago when the IRC was doing a show at the Bethany Mission, which is, of course, a wonderful collection of outsider art. Jean Ruddy and Victor Keene, wonderful proprietors of that gallery. Anyway, we met there, and we have a love of absurdist theater. And Liz Goldberg is a painter. She is a graphic artist. She's an animator. She is trained in painting and graphics. She has her MFA from Pratt in New York City, and she is teaching fashion illustration at Pratt and also at Drexel University. And I am so very, very delighted to welcome to the table Liz Goldberg.
I'm
You on, Liz?
I think we're there.
There you go.
Yeah.
So everybody, if you have not muted your audio and your video, do that to make the conversation a little bit easier all the way around. It's just down on the bottom of the bar, just mute audio and mute video if you are in the waiting room. Very good. Thank you so much. Liz, welcome to Into the Absurd. I am so delighted to have you here. You look like you are in your studio, surrounded by all your divas and all the wonderful illustrations. So I told a little bit about the work that you do in fashion illustration up at Pratt and the work that you do at Drexel here, but you also are a very accomplished in animation and animated film with your partner, Warren Bass, who is in the film department over at Temple. We're going to talk about Cuban Queens. That's going to come up in just a couple of minutes. We're not going to be showing your short animated film today, but for everybody who's is listening at side tables here for the dinner conversation, in the chat box, we're going to put the Vimeo link. So I hope that you will go in and look at Cuban Queens. It is a wonderful, wonderful project that I'm going to have Liz talk to you about. You have to really experience the whole thing, all 6 to 7 minutes of it, to really appreciate it. So do that, and also visit lizgoldberg.com. But Liz, welcome to Into the Absurd. And I want to ask you, first thing that I've been thinking about is, so you're a MFA from Pratt, and it's your graduation day, and you're out there in New York City, and where did you go from there?
It's actually a funny story, because while I was for my MFA at Pratt, Sesame Street was just starting. Jim Henson was on, and Kermit Love was teaching a theater class in puppetry, and I took it as an elective. And I must say that it was the most intimidating class I ever took in life, because there were true puppeteers in the class. I was taking it as almost a puppet-inspired imagery. But from there, I actually did an internship with Sesame Street. We were on the set. Kermit Love was the one that designed Kermit the Frog. So there was this kind of start point of puppet-inspired imagery, which I'd been really intrigued with all along. And from there, I think it was like a beginning of theater. I mean, I have a theater background as well. And I think being on the set of Sesame Street, it just blew me away. I mean, it literally was in a townhouse at that time on East 69th Street. And you went in and you took an elevator down, and there was the TV set. And I remember my first feeling, and this was an absurdist feeling, when Jim Henson popped out of Big Bird. I took the head off and there was a TV set right in there. So I wasn't sure if it ruined my kind of childhood image of it. So that was my first direction. And I worked in puppet inspired imagery for quite some time.
And this is coming right out of school, right? This is sort of a first experience.
And then from there, I think you wind your way around looking for the direction you're going in. And I did a lot of that. And at the same time, I think right around then, was working with a little bit more theater at that time. And I started to just draw imagery with strings. And I was more interested in the drawing aspect of it than I was in puppetry of the 3D. I think I'm just completely a 2D person. I'm like Gumby, just flat. So I did a lot of I just started to draw. And as I went forward with them, Leslie Ash at the time, who was actually the executive director, there were 6 artists that were chosen from around the world to actually have a show on one of the islands of puppetry inspired. And they picked mine as one. So I kind of just went with puppetry inspired for quite some time. And actually, I was working that way when I met Warren at that time.
Warren Bass, your partner,
yeah,
your frequent collaborator. That
yes.
we'll talk about the Cuban Queens in just a couple of minutes. But
yeah.
You talk about the use of the diva, and we see that in the work behind you. And I'm interested to know, does that come from your own sort of alter ego to want to get that?
Yeah.
Super diva out there? Is it people
I think what it was with the puppet inspired imageries, there was the puppet master, and there was the whole concept of strings, of being attached to strings. And eventually there was a piece we created where the strings were cut and the diva emerged. So there was this aspect of it in film, but I think it's probably my alter ego and wanting to just be the diva. Like when I go to opera and the diva is there, to me, that's one of the most exciting things. So yeah, I'm sure it is. I think we're all, I'm always fascinated with those 3 parts of us, the one that's walking down the street, but the one that wants to just kind of sing out and yell, here I am.
So yeah. Do you feel that in yourself? Like, I'll back up here. When you create, when you work, do you have set times that you work in the studio? Do you work when you're moved? And is that diva a part of what is like, I got to get upstairs and paint now? Does it like that?
Usually I work, it's funny, I don't have any set times. I've always had the studio within my house. And I really work kind of around the clock. I'm always drawing. I'm always putting together, there are stacks of drawings all over the house. My studio is actually here and then also downstairs, but I think I work all the time. My ideas are always coming. When I'm in the studio proper and I'm painting and I've got everybody knocked out, I think that's when the two, the ego and the alter ego, they all merge, but they're merging within my head as I'm painting. So I think, it's, but I'm constantly thinking and working almost all the time. So, yeah.
Let me ask you, in your artist statement, you talk about the myriad ramifications of the emerging alter ego, which I assume is that, I guess that gets back to this whole idea of the diva, but is that something that you are aware of in the work?
Yes.
I mean, are the ramifications, I guess the question better phrased is, are the ramifications to your soul, or do they find their way into the work on the paper?
You know what? I think it's a combination. And I always say that it comes out of my fingertips. You know, it goes with the paintbrush. What I find is that those are the, I guess, the emotions, the different ways that you think of. That was what puppetry excited me, because you could be mischievous, you could be devilish, you could be a little evil here and there. So through puppetry, you can do that. You can be many things. And I think the same thing happens with the alter ego, is that when I'm painting and when these characters are developing, it's a matter of the character being developed. And through a lot of drawings, and I'll explain later when we talk about the film, that the film comes first and the paintings come second. It's the concept of creating a character. And it's probably very much like theater, where you ingest it with a personality. They have a name. Everybody has a name. And I have friends that ask me, are you talking about a painting or are you talking about somebody you know? I do this quite often, you know, like Gloria is sitting in the back here, Jojo is over here. I think
And
I live within this world, you know, that people don't see me in, but I do live within it, you know, my
do
family.
you see the character before you create them, or they emerge
No,
just like when you're working on a part in
they
stage, sort of
emerge.
like
They
you,
emerge.
it comes to you a little bit? Do you move when you paint? Do you, because
Yes.
in, you
Yeah,
know,
I do.
we'll
Yeah.
talk about Cuban Queens. That is, well, let's
Hmm.
just get to Cuban Queens right now because it's so
Yeah. Yeah.
fabulously interesting, and we'll
Yeah.
get that link up there for you so you can make sure everybody in the that's
Great.
listening today can take a look at Cuban Queens. So what happened from the experience that I had when I was watching it, Liz, and I'm guessing this is the experience you wondered, is I literally saw so many different kinds of people merging together in this very soulful, colorful, beautiful expression of dance. It was very mesmerizing. And
Mhm.
so tell us a little bit about the individual drawings that went into creating this. Is 6 minutes,
Yeah.
7 minute?
About 6 minutes. We actually, the original film was 30 minutes long. So it was supposed to be a hypnotic event that you could experience. But because of the film festivals, we have to be between 6 and 8 minutes for experimental film, short film. So we laboriously cut it down, which was very difficult. And what happens is, really, in my head, the very first thing that comes to me um, is Latin dance. I hear Latin music. I'm very inspired. So it's very much about dance. I'm convinced somewhere in my past it was a great dancer. Somewhere I can draw it. I'm not sure I can dance it. So I hear that, and that's the start of everything. And then when we went to Havana, um, I just started to draw the people there. I was picking specific people, but they were the divas. There were so many different characters while I was there. And we went to the nightclubs. It's a very exciting country. We get a different picture of it than it's very artistic. And I started to draw. I met one woman. It started with this one woman, and to this day, I really don't know her name, but she is the original cigar queen. And I had this image of to do some research on the women in Havana that smoke and drink whiskey, that they smoke the cigars, and there is a club down there. So this is where that start point was, and I started to draw, and then I did hundreds of drawings, but we came up, and this is something Warren and I have done before with Drumba. You come up with 99 drawings.
99 drawings. Mm-hmm.
99 drawings, and they evolve. So it's like a rhythmic construction and deconstruction
So
of these drawings. And then they become extensions, almost like dance, and they extend out. And yeah, and I guess, of the divas of the streets of Havana. So I did a lot of walking and a lot of
yeah,
exploring.
how did you do that? Did you have a sketch pad with you and you just stood
I,
on the street
you
and
know what?
sketched and then
I sketch very slyly. I carry 3x5 cards with me. And I sketch. Sometimes I just memorize what I see and then I put it down. Sometimes I'll ask the person, mostly if I am wanting to sketch someone, I will talk to them and ask their permission if I can. So yeah, it was walking around. There were just so many wonderful characters. So I started to draw, and I'm not even sure I was aware of the whole depth of what I was going to create. I just knew I had to draw. And I could hear salsa in my head. When I hear a dance in my head, I know there's a film coming. So
Mhm.
this is sort of how I judge. If I hear a tango, I know there's going to be another film.
When you did Cuban Queens with Warren, who you
Mhm,
did postgraduate work over at Temple in the film program, right? And you've worked together since 1999 on a number of projects, and these films have won quite a few awards in 30 countries now. This
mhm.
Cuban Queens
Cuban Queens.
specifically, Cuban
We were
Queens, sorry.
so
Um,
surprised on that one.
it's really quite mesmerizing, and I'd be interested to know how you decided how to cut it down. But I noticed that about 4 minutes into it, it starts to take on color, right? It starts
Mhm.
in black and white and then takes on color, which adds this whole other resonance to it. So were you going in and coloring the initial black and white sketches that you did, and then you went and colored those same back, or they're different sketches
Very
entirely?
different. Yeah, what happened was is that the drawings are usually black and white. I carry a pencil, I carry an eraser and a sharpener, and that's about it. Do the drawings, and then I come back and I start to work them up. But I don't go into the color right away. We go to the film. We
Mhm.
actually go to film next, of thinking about how we're going to put the film together, and we start to put it together in an order. I use a technique called rotoscoping, where I can then feed it through my cameras, so that we have a rhythm moving. We have a constant rhythm moving. And I usually I work with earphones, and I have Latin music playing in my ears. And then we start to put together a story. We put together a story. It's mostly abstract. If you notice, none of our films have any narrative to them.
Mhm.
Um, and I also have to put an insert here, is that when I first started film, and this is way back even in undergraduate, silent film was my inspiration, and I never knew why. So coming back to here, animation and doing postgraduate work, the day I took animation, all the pieces of everything started to put together, because you have to draw very quickly in
Mhm.
animation. So when I'm doing, what we're doing is we're building off these drawings, and we're deconstructing and reconstructing them into a whole movement of the images working together almost as a dance. They're going forward. The color came, I think, came later. They became paintings. So the characters emerged um, from there. And then they started to mix together. And then they became, as you can see in the back, triptychs and diptychs.
Mhm.
I am a colorist at heart. So for me to work only in black and white sometimes is very difficult. And then the colors, they just pop. They're there. I think as we go through art school, we go through graduate school, we know our palette. Like, we do come with a palette that we're very much aware of. So this is where, when we're doing the film came second, and then the paintings came third. And then
Mm.
the colors just emerge. And you can see even behind you, uh, I don't know, there's richness. The main thing to my work is the gestural line. If the gestural line and the line of the piece and the person is looking at you the right way, like I like to make eye contact with my characters,
Mhm.
so that they are really from that puppet time. Some of them are, they're trouble.
Mhm.
Some of them are more innocent.
And is that what's largely coming through in what you call the gestural line?
Yeah.
Is that the body? Is that the line of the body and the way, the articulation of that? And so in the same way in dance or in theater, that
Hmm.
expression
Yeah.
comes through the gestural line
Yeah,
is.
there's something that is in that. And I have found, when Warren and I work together, as a team, there is the essence of the drawings. I mean, I just draw. He's the editor. It's like a dance partner. He then takes it and he starts to look at it as a film piece, of how to move it through music, how to move it through that part of animation. And then the two together, for some reason, we worked so many of them, starting with Drumba, which was our 3 minute and 28-second piece that I think won the British Animation Award. It was they dance by day, they dance by night, the sun goes up, the sun goes down. We did it in film. I did the soundtrack, not even knowing how to play an instrument. And that was the start of when the images come together, they produce movement. So it's dance piece.
Can you talk a little bit about, we use the word collaboration a lot, certainly in all different disciplines, but I love the idea of, you're taking this work and making it into film. And the fact that you guys have been working together since 1999 is quite, I would say, a nod to this collaboration. Can you speak to how that, I mean, you've talked about it a little bit, but I'm sort of interested in what that means when you cross disciplines in that way. You tell us more about that.
Yeah, and I think Tina, you and I have talked many times on this too. I call myself a crossover because I do go through many disciplines. I think a lot of it too has to do with background. I mean, I have a theater background, I love film. So I'm able to, I think, translate through different languages. But the art of collaboration, and I thought about this when we were talking about it, it is an art. And you have to come into it. I think there's a spark with two minds meeting. You play off each other. And when you're working, you almost have to be at two opposite ends of the spectrum. Two painters sometimes cannot work together. Mm-hmm. So Warren being in film, his sense of editing is amazing. I do all the drawing. I just draw. And then we put this together, we talk about it, and then I hand it off to him. Mm-hmm. And he starts to put that special touch he has with it. But I think with collaboration, you have to be willing to give up a little of yourself. You have to understand these other disciplines, that if it translates into film, how is that different? Like theater, remember I came and sat in on your yeah. To draw. I was drawing the movement across the stage. So it's this whole idea of space. There's been just a special spark, I think, between the two of us for all these years, almost 20 years. An idea comes up, I start drawing, he comes up, he'll send me some film clips, just film clips to start working with. I start drawing, he takes it, we start to edit, we go back, we redraw. And I think it has to do also just with my ability to draw and be able to recreate. For animation, you have to sit for maybe 8 hours at a stretch to get the rhythm, to get the scene. Mm-hmm. And we talk about it, but a lot of times I think our communication is almost like through the air. Sure. We're both working in different disciplines, but there's just been a magic that's gone on. And then we produce these films that seem to win awards with kind of the best of both worlds put together.
It feels very much like a wonderful tango that you do, where you know when to step back, when to move around. And as you say, much of the success of it could largely be that you're combining disparate but similar qualities together.
I think that's it. Yeah, but you can't be in each other's camp all the time. You have to see it. You have to let it go a little bit. Sometimes we step on each other's toes, but
my favorite thing I have to tell people about, if you've been to the Bethany Mission Gallery, any of the IRC shows, that's, I think I mentioned at the front end of the show, that's how Liz and I met. She had a show that was happening at Victor's Gallery, and we just started talking about absurdist theater, but she's also done a wonderful collection. If you use the bathroom at the Bethany Mission Gallery, you will
oh my God, yeah.
Liz's total collection that she's done of Victor, which is a really interesting. So your ability to sort of take on the many different colors and personalities, and as you say, that gestural line of a person is quite remarkable and so alive. And so, I hope that theatrically we can find a way to make
it. Well, Tina, you and I have been, I think we have that same spark. We always look at each other and that the ideas are coming. And I think, through the gesture, I'm fascinated with personalities. I'm fascinated with people, and I think that's part of understanding a drawing, that the gesture
Hmm.
tells that. But I would love, I just think it's so exciting and to do that. But that's the ability, I think that's the ability of collaboration. You've got to be careful of your own ego in collaboration. You have to be able to, it's a dance partner, it's a sport, you're moving at all times. But you also both have to be so invested. I think we've both been invested for so many years. We're actually starting a new film this summer. We are completely under wraps at this moment, but we're starting.
Good.
But
We'll
I
have you
know
both
working,
back on the show when
yeah,
you're
but I
when it's a little
know
bit.
working with you was that day we met. I think we felt like we had known each other for like
The
20
old
years.
Soul Club. So have you ever been, well, let me ask you, how long were you in Havana when you're doing the initial sketches for this? Was this a plan? I mean, did you take a trip
This
for the sole purpose of drawing on the streets of Havana, or how did that go?
it was a dream that I had since I was 10. My father had been there years and years and years ago, and I had this fixation. I had to go. It's like and when I got there, and we tried many times before, but we were finally able to go under an umbrella as artists. And I went with the sole purpose that I just had to see. You get these intuitive feelings that you have to do these things, and no matter what anybody says, you have to do it. And we went, and my husband and I went, and when I got there, it just was like a magical experience, even getting off the plane, and going to the hotel. I didn't go with the idea that I was going to make a film. I just went that I needed to see what was going on. At the time, there was the Havana biennial running. It was one of the few that were running. So there were a lot of artists in the city as well. So we were traveling around. We were there literally for 8 days. And I drew from the beginning of the day. Once I met this one woman, um, I knew I had to do a film. I think I wrote to Warren. I said, "The Cigar Queen is here, the original." And I think the one person in the audience, Jim Nixon, he is the original Cigar Queen. The Cigar Queen was born, and that was how the Diva, the Diva and the Cuban Queen. We went from Diva at that point to Cuban Queens.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this changeover to a new genre almost.
Well, it seemed like the energy and the spirit and the color and the vibrancy that is what we may associate, not
Mm-hmm.
ever having been there with Havana, that would be perfectly suited to what you're doing. I want to
Yeah.
circle back, if it's okay,
Yeah.
to those early days, because I want to talk a little bit about your work as a professor at Pratt now,
Mm-hmm.
as a teacher, as an art teacher at Pratt, and then what that might look like and what advice you might have for students. But we'll get there. So those first days when you're out and you're working, that just keeps coming back to me, is that must have been extraordinarily rich for a young artist to be working around, of course, some of the greatest minds in ever in puppetry. And what did you take away? I mean, were you at the time, were you aware you were in greatness?
I think I
Or
was in shock, actually. um, I think I was. Jim Henson, was one of those people that was the ability to do film as well. I mean, he also did some amazing films on the side, but he had the ability, I think, to emote, there was that just came out into the air. I don't know. I think, we look back and we say, oh my gosh, yes, that was a real moving point. But I think when you're going through it, you're really flying by the seat of your pants. You have intuitive feelings that you have to be here, or you have to go back postgraduate and do 3 more years in film school to understand how to animate, how to edit, how to put things together. But I think those moments are really, they're accentuated by a gut feeling that you just know that somehow this is an important,
stay here, don't move,
don't
be in
move,
this
just keep
person's
looking.
aura, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you kind of amass them.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
I think it's so true, right? You're in the middle of something and you don't know how important or great that's going to be down the line. As you're working with the students at Pratt, and I know we talked a little bit about you're getting ready to do some virtual teaching, some, trying to get your train ticket to get up to New York to know how to do all of this.
Yeah.
Do you, what do you think the experience for young people, what do you hear from them coming out of school today? What is the world like? And COVID aside, maybe,
Yeah.
or maybe
Yeah.
we can't talk about it without talking about that. But
Yeah.
um,
I think there's fear. I know I was fearful the minute I finished my thesis show. And I was lucky enough that a law firm came in and bought all of them and took them home with them, which was great. And it's right here in Philadelphia, which I didn't know. I had fear because now what? You have all these great, you're coming, you've been ensconced in this wonderful world. And now the door closes behind you and you have to make a living. So you have to be resourceful. I mean, you really have to be resilient, resourceful, and come up with ways that you can combine everything. I know at that point, I started teaching privately, and I picked an area in Philadelphia that had no art school. So by a year's end, I had 100 students, and I was teaching in a toilet factory. He said, if you want that room, you can have it. And there were nothing but toilets. So I said, well, I can teach ellipses. At least we can. And everybody would sit on a part of a toilet and we drew. It was like you just, when we talk about theater of the absurd, if I had had a camera back then, it would have been truly a stage set worthy of its. And kids were just very happy to work. And we even did puppetry. We did puppetry, and it was like a one-man show,
so this was your own thing that you just decided you were going to teach. You're in Philly, you get to the toilet factory, and you
Yeah,
just had 100 students, and this is where you met, and this is where art. And
it was a start. Yeah,
this was your. Have you always worked as an artist? Did you ever work as say, in a corporate position anywhere,
no,
as a graphic
no.
artist? So you've always.
I've been an artist my entire life from the go-get. So I don't even know if I'd be able to exist in a corporate situation. I don't know. I started out at such a young age that that was the world. And I think too, you get encouragement from parents. You may have one parent that's mortified, and then you have the other parent that says, just fly, just go. And that's what I had. I had like a theater of the absurd growing up in my own home. And then I had parents in the wrong professions. My mother was a lawyer that should have been a designer that would rearrange the house every day. And my father, who was an engineer, that should have been the artist and was doing inventions, and yet, how do you make a salary at the same time? So I think I kind of grew up in that very bizarre atmosphere to begin with. So I really didn't even know about corporate really,
You
until,
just did it. You just got out there and
yeah.
did it. Do you think it's the same? I mean, for students coming out today,
I think now it's even more frightful. And one other little insert there was when I was in undergraduate school, my father was smart enough to make me go to business club. The school I was at when I was at Columbia to begin with, and then I transferred to York, which had film, and it was in Toronto. He made me go to business class on Friday, business classes, because they had a business school. And he would call me at 8 o'clock every Friday evening and quiz me. He said, if you can't get the art out of the studio and onto the street, it will not happen. So it wasn't like I was, I think the main thing is you have to think of a way that you're going to be able to exist as an artist. How are you going to do this? And yes, you'd like to paint all day in your studio, but it doesn't always happen that way. We have to come up with interesting ways. So teaching, and being a professor, I think is one of the best ways for me, because you're almost an artist and you're handing off the baton a little to your students, and I talk to a lot of my students. I have a few in the audience, I think, that are there of, where do you go once that door closes? You've got to come up with a game plan of how you're going to make it happen. But I really try to let them know what the real world is as I'm teaching, instead of an idealistic balloon image, of that this is, you've got to come up with a creative way or a outside the box way of making it work, no matter what it is. So that's,
As you think about the semester upcoming, how
yeah.
does one teach? It's fashion illustration that you're teaching,
It's
is that correct?
fashion illustration.
And so how are you doing that with models? Do you have
Yes,
models in your studio? How is
I have two models. I actually have three from New York. We're working with, and one I worked with all spring, Kika Van Clock, and then Susan Mitchell and Samira Abadella. Kika, I will give anything to make her work with me. I will come up with any, if I don't have a live model, I can't teach. It's almost impossible to teach the figure, to teach the movement, to teach how a garment constructs on a body. She taught with me. She actually had her studio set up for, for being on, so she would come as a guest. And she and I worked together for 10 years at Pratt, that we almost understand the rhythm of what needs to be done. Susan Mitchell is another one. So this summer, I actually have both of them on for Drexel on different days. When I have the model up there, I think it's a dance with them, of being able to teach the movement, the gesture. How does a figure move? What happens if you put an article of clothing on? How does the elongation? Because I'm not sure you can do it any other way. And this has been, I think, one of the most challenging times. First of all, learning Zoom, and I have very close, dear friends saw me at my worst trying to figure this thing out, because you're still in the glass. You're still, like I had one student say to me from Pratt, she said, "You taught so hard, I thought you were going to come through the glass." I think you have to be theatrical. I think you have to, get them up and say, okay, we're all gonna pose. We're all gonna do this. What does it feel like in your body? I think it's very much like, when you're in a
yeah.
dance class. But I find it highly challenging. I don't know whether it's as successful as it should be. I think you have to be within the space.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, I saw this really interesting interview with Mark Jacobs at the very beginning of back in March, and he was just talking about, the question was, what are you doing? And he said, I am not doing anything right now because I feel like I need to be in the room with my designers and, feeling the fabrics and how that lays on the body and what that feels like. So it's got to be really challenging, I would think, to be teaching.
it is so challenging. I mean, I'm up at night sometimes trying to figure out how how can I relate that it's a 3D experience. You're looking at the model from 3 different angles. Having them come in is very helpful because they know the routine, they know the warm-ups. The challenging thing is, and I think my students have expressed it to me, is that there's nobody standing behind them, helping them. It's like if you were trying to learn surgery by Zoom, you have to have someone show your hand. Don't cut so deep, I think that's the most challenging part, is that I'm not really, I usually circle the room. I don't even sit down usually, and I circle and I'll jump behind them. So that, to me, I'm not sure what they're doing back there sometimes.
Mhm.
Most of them are drawing. So that, I think, is the most challenging part
Well,
of.
and so much energy that's nonverbal gets exchanged or communicated
Mhm.
when you're right next to somebody. So
Yeah,
that's got to be. I
it's
have
theater.
a couple
Yeah.
questions here back about
Mhm.
Cuban Queen, and so there's one question here. What does the Queen in Cuban Queen mean? Is it equitable? Is it diva? Is it gendered? Is it?
It became, it became the Cuban Queen. It just became that. I'm fascinated with drag queens. I find them extraordinary, and it's not so much the gender. I don't know. I'm not political. We once tried a piece to be political. It was horrible, Warren. It was like he said, "You have no political. You can't get it." So what it is, it's more about the empowerment, of being within who you are. But with the Queen, and the thing I'm fascinated with is the metamorphosis. How
Mhm.
do you go from one person into this other character. And I think that's the part. I do love that whole scene. I love every aspect of it. I love 16th century when the men were on stage dressed up as women. And I just like when you move through those worlds. And I think I'm looking at it from a very different viewpoint than gender-based. I mean, I accept everything, I think, you know, but I look at it more as an artistic tool. And there's something about when you're not sure who's who of what they're doing. There's that puppetry aspect again, a little bit of deviousness, or they're looking at you. I always have to have my characters, they have to look something, they have to be looking at you a certain way. If they're not looking a certain way, I wipe them off the canvas and start all over again.
It's not a direct.
Yeah.
When you say that Warren said that it was not good, that when you tried the political film and Warren was like, this is horrible. What was horrible about it? What wasn't working?
I just think I wasn't being political enough. I was being more playful, or
you weren't taking enough risks in the politics of it. You were trying to be political, or
I was trying, and it wasn't
I see. And you
in
didn't go far
I don't
enough.
think it was in my heart. And you know, we have a funny story because when I was in graduate school, I took screen directing, and it forever is set in my mind. I can act. I can be me. I can act. I understand theater. I come from that world, but I can't act. And I remember we had to become a character, and I had to become Blanche Dubois. And I remember because we laugh about it, and he said to me, he said, that was the worst production I ever saw in my entire life. So you can imagine. And yes, I agree. Now, if I had drawn it or drawn the entire scene and been smart enough, I could have gotten an A in that class. But it was, so some of these disasters or some of these understandings, I think, help you to know what your parameters are and to stick with what you know about. But I
don't know, Liz. I don't think I'd cast you as Blanche. I mean,
no.
I might be Stella. I'm not sure about Blanche, but I would love to see that.
We will go into detail on that at one point. It may become a theater of the absurd piece because I think that's where it was reaching. But I just remember that there were certain parameters I know I shouldn't cross.
Well, I have those thoughts a lot when I look at your drawings or I look at artwork, or I have, what's the book where the artist's way, where they get you to draw and everything. And I'm just like, I don't know how people do this, like I look at your works and I just can't replicate. So I do think the fascination we all have with like, how does that happen? And yet, putting the hat on every now and then and trying that or trying those muscles out is always a real surprise and something something very fun. Do you feel like your life is romantic?
Oh,
do you feel like you live the romantic painter existence?
I think I do. I think I live it in every aspect. I live it at home, my husband. I feel I love romance. I love 16th century. I love it all. And that's the color. I think it's the excitement. I don't know if I can be dry or droll. I really do. I think I am, but I'm doing it in a way that's constructed very differently. You have to be practical too, because otherwise we, might be living in a garret, with no heat, but you have to be somewhat practical of how you're going to make it happen. But yet I have opportunities in my studio, in my home, to express all that, to have a studio and to be able to paint. But I think that romantic image, it may not be as, as we think. We still have to be there's a practical part of me. There is a practical part of me that is always figuring out, how am I going to make this work? How will I make the ends meet? How do you pay for this? Because when we're producing films now and we're producing artwork like a show, to frame a show is maybe $5,000. To get a video monitor, I priced them for the show we were supposed to have in April in New York. I mean, they were in the thousands just for a couple of nights, to show. So I think there has to be a practical end to it. Like I was always in love with Modigliani, but he lived a very sad life. I mean, it was short. And so I think in order to keep all of it together, you have to have one side, but yeah, I think I do. I mean, I've been working it all these years. It's like, you know, and keeping that flame going. I think it's, you know, it's a certain way of just looking at life, I think, you know.
Was there ever a time where you considered that you might not be able to,
Oh yeah.
that you would have to shift gears, or that you would need to
Hmm. Get a real job. Yeah. No.
do something else to supplement it? Or has it always just been, you've had have you always had a really strong and enduring faith in your talent and in your skill? And
I think so, but I've always I've always done many jobs at the same time. I mean, I was a dog walker at one point and cat sitter. You know, you come up with ingenious ways to kind of figure out how to make the art go forward. Being a professor is a really great one because you can still retain your integrity as an artist. But yeah, there've been, oh my gosh, yeah, there've been a few hurdles that you just go, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to
get
jump
over this
into
one.
buildings. Yeah.
You were represented by the Amsterdam Whitney
Mhm.
Gallery in New York City. Tell me about that experience, your first gallery show, and what that felt like. And is that, is
That
that
was an
like,
extraordinary
you
gallery.
know, is that
That
big on the
was,
runway or?
yeah, it was a gallery that had theatrics. Ruthie Tucker ran the gallery, Amsterdam Whitney. Her husband worked for the UN, so he was always decked out in his full regalia. Um, she made it theatrical, but I remember I had to go through 3 hoops before I got there. And they would say to you, if she serves you tea on the 3rd trip in, you're in. And she served me tea and these little, um, I found that gallery, I love that gallery.
Mhm.
The problem is that she wanted divas only. So when I started to go forth and Cuban Queens and I was doing film, I had to take a hiatus at that point in order to kind of follow. But it was all New York. It
Mhm.
was totally New York, New York. The openings, we had to have a theme. We had to dress the part. We had to wear opera gloves. Everybody got a mask. It was a full out evening of gala.
Mhm.
Um, and she was a wonderful gallery director because she could sell work. So
But that's
I was,
the main point there, right? Is to sell the work. That's what you're getting larger
yeah.
exposure so that you can, what do you imagine will galleries, what do you imagine that will look like in the years to come?
You know, I don't know. I mean, so many galleries are suffering right now. And you know, you have to have a hook when you have a gallery. You have to
Mhm.
have something that's going to draw people in. And you know, I've been in a lot of galleries and gone on so many gallery interviews even since then, hoping that a certain gallery would like the work. Um, I don't know. Some of those galleries are so empty. I think they have to branch out and be able to look at the crossover installations, the film. I don't know whether the pure painting gallery can exist anymore. And I think there has to be something, because I've been doing a lot of installations. Warren and I were doing a lot with like Philadelphia Museum, Barnes, mixing it with dance when they had the big dance festival here from Paris. um, I think there has to be an integration. There's just out of necessity. I mean, I even look at opera. You know, I spend a lot of time at the opera. I come from an operatic family, and it's changed. It's changed tremendously. There's much more video. It's a different kind of theater experience. I think theater too. I mean, you might find that as well, of how is theater presented now, you know, maybe a little more intimate space. Or we're never going to be able, you know, I was watching something on one of the opera singers and he said, I don't know if we're ever going to go back, but we have to, I look at it this way, we have to look at what we have and think of it, how do we put this together in a way we've never looked at it before? Like, well, how do the puzzle pieces go together now? Because otherwise, I think you sink. I think you have to be so resilient and so innovative of, like, even what we're doing now, you know, these interviews and the virtual. Um, of how it goes together. So that's kind of I don't know. I think it's a lot of them
I
are
think we don't know, right?
no, it's and that's frightening. Uncertainty, I think, to an artist is extremely frightening, more so because we emote about it. Um, but we have to. I just think of what I love, and this is where collaboration comes in, of reaching. We're working with people that we may not have worked with before. Or we bring a collaboration together to try something out because this person knows that expertise. So I think through that, it probably has just a new way of looking at things that may integrate when we go back to what we might call the normal. Um, and I had listened to him, and he was very clear about it. He said, I need my people. I need my people. I can't do this all by myself.
Yeah, normal
So
seems like a word that almost doesn't even
it doesn't exist
have any
anymore. Yeah.
meaning.
I call it the
Nor do
year of
we
the
really
Romulus.
want it to on some
No,
level, I think. You know, it's
no.
just
You
not a
have to be
thing.
ready to, I think, to move. You know, you do have, when these things happen, or you will not be able to move. I call it the year of the Romulus, and I don't even know what that is, but it just seems like there's one too many angles in the picture, you know, and you can get stuck by it. But I think, as you say, you have to kind of come up with new ways of combining the other. And even in painting, that's like, even with the Cuban Queens, they're diptychs and triptychs. There's 15 of them, and there's only about 5 characters, but they become new characters when they're next to somebody else, you know, who I think Russian film did a whole thing on that in the 1920s or something. So I think that's, you know, it's the kind of recombining
Mm-hmm.
of that.
That's an interesting thought. You become someone different when you are next to someone else. How
Yes.
you, which is what I loved about the short, you know, your short animated film, is that like it all just merged together and just kept morphing and changing and moving. And
Yeah.
I'm going to take one last question, Liz,
Yeah.
and then I think that we'll open it up. We'll
Sure.
let anyone in who's in the audience who wants to ask questions. And there's one more question down here, Liz, from a question. Do the films, have you guys made money doing the films, or is it just a passion of love that you do, and teaching is your real, and the art that you sell? And is
No, you know what, my art comes first. My art is always first in my heart of making art, whether it sells or it doesn't sell. It's the art making. I think teaching is part of that process. But the art making, Warren and I think it's the prestige you get when you're in an indie film. You make no money. I mean, I really don't think you make that much, but being amongst independent filmmakers and the prestige of winning maybe the British Animation Award because you hand drew the entire film. I hand draw every film we do. That put us in a special category. But film, you have to be in that for the passion. I mean, you just have to do it. There's no other way. Painting, I can sell. And I know that I've come up with ingenious ways of selling portraits. I did dog portraits for a little while. I mean, you
colorful
can't have,
dog portraits?
yeah, very well. Some of them were, I think it was an Alaskan dog, so he was kind of gray. I put a nice little collar around him,
Was it pink?
Huh?
Was it pink?
Hot pink. But I think you do have to think of the selling, and you know,
Sure.
you have to come up with ingenious ways to do it, and you can't have an ego. You have to get rid of your ego at the door and say, yes, I will paint a
Well, I
portrait
think,
of a
Phyllis,
parrot if you want.
I think, Liz, when you decided to have a 100 student
Yeah.
class in the
In the
toilet
toilet
factory,
factory. I mean, it was, and I looked at it one day and I said, you know, I'm really crazy. But I had
you're
100,
still here.
and I had 100 students, and the parents were so happy to have them in art school, and the kids thought it was hysterical. So
You need to sit, right? I mean, you
yeah,
have
they
to
need
have a
to
place
sit
to sit.
somewhere. So, and you can teach an ellipse from. But
All right. Well,
yeah.
it is nearly 6 o'clock. Liz Goldberg, and time for your real dinner. And I think what I want to do is just thank everybody who's been a part of the conversation today. Thank you very much, Liz, for your stories.
Oh, and
I found
thank
out,
you for having me on. I'm
oh,
so
it was my
honored. Yeah,
pleasure. So
yeah.
many wonderful stories that I didn't know. This is why we do this, right? To find out more about the people in our own communities. And I think that what we'll do is in a couple of minutes, if there's anybody in that's been watching from an adjacent table, dining with us, that would like to ask Liz a question, we'll unmute video and audio, and we can do that. In the meantime, I will just thank you all for being here, and I look forward to seeing you on Saturday, July the 11th, when we will be joined by my friend and colleague Patrick Stoner. He's a WHYY film critic, and he's got stories and stories about the work that he's done over the years. I've so much enjoyed being raising money with him, mostly at WHYY, but also he's just an all-around great person, and I think he's going to be a real great guest. So if we have your email address, you'll be getting an email from us, and you just register the same way you did on Zoom, or you can watch it on Facebook Live. And in the meantime, I wish all of you that are leaving now to go have your dinner a safe and healthy and happy 4th of July. And thank you so much for being here for this conversation.